Uh, there is a finance committee. The board obviously has ultimate say in our spending plan, or the congregation has ultimate say in voting to support what the board brings us. But Marty Lehman has agreed this morning to tell us one part of that process and story, and that's the role of the Stewardship Committee. Many of you know her, some of them less well, and she refused to give me a bio that would let me do my version of her life. So she promised she would tell us a little bit about her background, just to remind us who she is. Marty, thanks so much for coming. And you need to swallow the mic for these hard of hearing neighbors of mine.
Well, good morning. And I will, for those of you that don't know who I am or don't know me well, I have been a part of this church since the 1980s. And so I've spent really my adult life as a part of this congregation. I have also spent most of my adult life working for Mennonite organizations. I started my first job actually working for what was then called child welfare. So that was my non-Mennonite job. And then I started working at Goshen College. I was in admissions for 11 years. Went from that to Mennonite Board of Missions and Mennonite Mission Network. Spent a few years at Adriel in West Liberty, Ohio. Adriel is a Mennonite Health Services organization. And then I worked for 10 years for Mennonite Church USA at the national level, and then finished here as administrative pastor. I retired late in 2018. So when I retired, I was working with my spiritual director on what that would look like, because I knew that I would still be busy. I just wouldn't be getting a paycheck for that busyness. And as all of you know, it's easy to pretty soon have all your time consumed. So now I'm going to have to at some point go through and say I'm too busy. I chair the stewardship committee here at CMC, and I'm also the chair for the ministry support group for David and Sophie Lapp-Jost ministry, which is part of our congregation, and they are in Germany. I am an Indiana, Michigan congregational coach at Waterford and at East Goshen. And I volunteer at Mennohoff, and they need volunteers. So if any of you have any interest in that, let me know. And I'm serving as the moderator-elect for Mennonite Church USA. I'll be moving into the moderator role next summer at the convention. The convention will be in Greensboro. Is that North or North Carolina? Thank you. So I have plenty of things to keep me busy. But I want to talk about stewardship, and your title was the committee and our role and our goals and our challenges. So let's start just with a short history. Del, you gave a little bit of that. We're a relatively new committee, I think probably less than 5 years. Prior, we had an administration commission, and then that was dissolved, and we divided into two groups, a finance committee and a stewardship committee. And like Adele said, we're both committees of the church board, so that's who we report to. And then the stewardship committee also has the CMC Investment Management Committee and the CMC Student Aid Committee under our role. So that's how those committees fit. Now, I just want to take a sidebar, and I don't really want to spend our time on this because I know we could, but I want to just talk a little bit about the investment fund, because, and that, what that is. Sometimes we use the word investment fund, sometimes we use the word endowment fund, and which can get really confusing. Technically and legally, what we have is an investment fund with some endowment funds in it. A true endowment consists of funds that are donated by a donor with a signed endowment agreement, and it's directing the income, and usually the income then is kept in perpetuity. And so most of our gifts that are in our fund have been given to College Mennonite Church, and they have been unrestricted gifts. And then the church board has designated them for the investment fund. So I know I'm getting into technical stuff, but I just wanted to take that opportunity for you to understand the difference, why sometimes the different language is used, and why we've been trying to move to using investment fund rather than endowment, because that's actually what it is. So now, our committee, we are consisting of a pastoral team designee, and that is my role. The director of finance is on the committee, and then there's a representative from the church board. And so far, that has always been the board chair. So Everett Thomas was on, and now Rebecca Slough is. We have the CMC Everence advocate on the committee, which is Kent Miller. And then there are two members who are called by the church board, and that's Jeff Landis and Del King are also on the committee. We have been spending some time on our charter. We have a charter, but when we read through it, there were several of the responsibilities that after we were done, we were like, what does that mean? We don't even understand that. So we've gone through several drafts, but one of the things that we're adding and we're spending some time talking about, and for those of you that have worked with stewardship know that there's often the 3 T's: time, talent, and treasure. And unfortunately, for most stewardship groups, we tend to quickly gravitate towards treasure or money. And so that's what we've been doing also. But also, more recently, we're saying we really need to spend more time on the time and talent part of the 3 T's. And so we have, one of the ways we're going to do that is we've invited Worship Commission, Discipling Commission, and also Community Life. And they're going to join our next meeting, and we're going to talk about ways that we can maybe build some more rituals into worship, or part of our church life, that acknowledge our time and talent, thank people, encourage giving of time and talent. And how do we do that? So I don't think one meeting is going to solve that issue, but it's a way that we want to start working at that one. We have also talked about our ministry in terms of several things and a lot of this, Kent Miller also works at Everence, and he's the Everence advocate. So Kent's been helping us with a lot of the resources from Everence about stewardship, and to think about what is it that we should be doing besides just counting money and doing budgets, which is technically really more the finance committee's job. But so we've developed a list of thanking givers and volunteers. So thanking is part of what we want to do more of. Planning for the future. In the spring, we had a planned giving event that was hosted by the Horizons class. It was led by Todd Holsapple and Kent Miller. Everence does a wonderful job with offering those kind of services. Telling our stories. This is one that is an ongoing one, and you never can get to the place where you can say, well, we've checked that one off and we're done. But telling our stories, our giving stories, our volunteer stories, our life stories. So that's another role. Teaching stewardship principles and asking for involvement. And so those are some of the things that we're starting to work on. But it feels like even after all this time, as a committee, we're still working on getting ourselves organized. Here recently, for example, we spent some time, we need people to count the offering. And we didn't have enough people. And so sometimes Scott was left with no one to count the offering. And that is not from a fiduciary responsibility. That's a bad thing for a congregation when one person is left. And actually what happens when Scott doesn't have any counters is he just locks the money up and he waits till the next day. And on Monday, and then several staff count the money together so that no one person is doing it by themselves. But it is something that as we have cut FTE, it's something that volunteers can do. And so anyway, so we worked at that and we've had some good response to that. But it's just sometimes it's those little bitty things that we tend to forget about sometimes. Challenges. I would say that we have a lot of challenges. One of them is still figuring out our role, as I mentioned earlier. What is our role versus the finance committee's role? And sometimes we have spent, so like an example is at the end of the fiscal year, someone needed to do a report on how we came out on the end of the fiscal year. Well, is that our job or is that finance committee's job? And so then for a while, nothing happened. And at some point, I think our committee finally did it. But so that's something. It's very clear, and Randy Klaus is the chair of the finance committee, and I'll let Randy speak to some of the work they're doing. But I know that some of their responsibility is some of the spending plan, the budgeting process, and they are also responsible for the annual financial review. College Mennonite does not do an audit anymore, but we do a financial review. And so they lead that process also. And so one of the things that we're also doing with them is we're both working on our charters as a way of trying to clarify who does what, and so that we're not spending so much time in meetings saying, well, now, do we do that, or does finance committee do that? And we can be more clear about that. Another challenge, and I would be very happy for input from this group. There has been more of a trend in churches. I mean, these trends come and go, where your stewardship folks in your congregation, some would even advocate that your pastors should function a little bit more like development people. Now, that's overstating it a little bit, but that there's a strong correlation between giving, and it should be seen as a part of pastoral care. And so if Jane Doe, who attends our church, has been giving lots of money, and suddenly Jane is not giving any money. So who follows up with Jane to find out why she has stopped giving? Who should have access to giving information? So recently in our meeting, Jeff Landis was saying that we really need to look at giving patterns and who's giving less and why. But we also agreed that we weren't going to get names. We were just going to look at giving in general. We can't follow up if we don't know the name. And so that's why it becomes really tricky. And yet I also know that there are people that feel very strongly that they give the money to the church and they don't expect everybody to know how much they give. It's a private, confidential kind of a thing. So that's one of the challenges. There's a great book out about churches and giving, and this author, I did not bring it along, I don't even remember his name, but he very much advocates for churches operating more like a development department. Now, he doesn't use that language. He quotes it all in pastoral care. It's a part of pastoral care. And so every member at some point should be invited to include their congregation in their estate and their end of life gift and some of those kinds of things. We're having conversations in stewardship about that. We have no answers, and I would be very happy to get some feedback here. How should College Mennonite handle that? Who should know how much money you give? And do you expect, if is lack of giving, I mean, it certainly can be a sign of unhappiness. Maybe you're unhappy that, I don't know, the windows aren't washed often enough or whatever. But it also sometimes means a change for health reasons. More money is being spent on health care, and sometimes does the church know about that? So there'll be a variety of reasons. So I'm going to stop for a minute, and I'd be happy to get some feedback.
Thanks, Marty. You always give very clear presentations that are helpful. Appreciate it. Just a comment on your last question, coming from some work I did a few years ago. I had checked that question in relationship to other denominations and how they handle it. And I understand that the resources the congregation has helps to define the possibilities that exist for how that is handled. But what I heard at that point, now we're looking back 15 years, is that there was a clear separation between pastoral care and finance. And the reason they chose that method is that there was the possibility that in pastoral care, more pastoral care was given to people who had significant wealth, and that influenced how they cared. Now, they had the resources to have a minister of finance that had an MDiv and a MBA. So they had that advantage. But they separated that, and the person who had that responsibility on the finance end is the only one who had information about giving.
That's a really good point. And one of the real dangers of something like that. I want to also be clear that I have a lot of mixed feelings about all of this because I don't think a church should operate totally like a development office, but so I think that it's the balance.
Another aspect of stewardship is its theological meaning. And back in the days of the much beloved Dan Kaufman, he wrote a book about that and often spoke about that. And he gave credit to the Lutherans that he paid attention to in a sabbatical when he was in New York City. And they stressed that we give out of what we have received. So we don't start with the church's need. We don't start with how good it is to be generous, but we start with what we have received. That's the theological basis. And I think it's good from time to time to remember that.
Right. Yes, I agree.
I appreciate the work that you describe. If Warren Buffett were a member of our church, we'd have another problem. It would be a heavy one. I am less concerned about people knowing my finances or our finances than a bit of a gray area there is good, and there's ways to deal with that. Money in its own right is money. But relationships, the congregation, the fellowship, all of that should precede our dollars and cents.
Thank you. I mentioned earlier storytelling. One of the other things, and I think, and this is very much Vic with what you're talking about, I don't think that teaching our children to give and that whole philanthropy piece for children is the same as what it used to be. Many of you in this room would have stories of watching parents write out a check every Sunday and decisions that were made at home. I don't have good information of what all is happening currently with parents and children when it comes to giving. It's a very different world today. I think one of the things that we do that I think is a good practice is bringing the offering forward. I think is one way that children see that we give. And it's also a bit of for smaller children, it gets them up and allows them to get the squirrelies out of their leg and to run down and, whatever. So that there's a joy to it. And so I think that is one teaching, but I think about that a lot with our children. How are we teaching children to give nowadays? How do they understand their money and the theological basis of what we have belongs to God, and we actually only have part of it. And so, and I also know that our children at one time used to do more giving projects within their Sunday school classes, and I know that has really changed a lot. I also want to acknowledge that our children's Sunday school has really changed a lot with people don't attend churches regularly as they used to, and so there's dynamics there. We have children for whom Sunday school is brand new in our church, and so there's an awful lot of dynamics that are going on there. But it's not. But I'm obviously you hear me struggling with my own question. How do we teach children to give in this day and age when everything moves so fast and there are so many things going on and so many distractions? I'm sure all of you have wonderful words of wisdom for our committee. I mean, we've talked about that as a committee, but we have not. We also, you don't see that we have a series on giving. Are we not doing, maybe we're not doing enough preaching and teaching about giving. I'd be very interested in some of your thoughts on some of those things. Mark.
Unlike John Hertzler, who's been here about 90 years, we've only been here a couple, so we're learning all the things. One thing that bewilders me is we have these funds, like the Jubilee Fund, the Ministry Fund, the Students Fund, and we're sometimes don't know which one should we give to and how much. And so if there were, I don't know what type of guidance, but to say, we should do this or that would be helpful.
That was a segue into one of my questions. Is it a problem? Is it a challenge for the church because of special funds? I know there are people who say, okay, I'm going to give to this fund. I'm not giving to this fund, but I'm going, general fund perhaps, but I have a pet or I have a couple pet funds that I want to give to. Wonder if that's a challenge for.
It is a challenge because sometimes the need is greater in other funds, the ministry fund and what we call ministry is interesting. Let's just put it that way. Sometimes people talk about overhead or payroll or so on. But there's a lot of ministry. The only way ministry generally happens in this church is through people. And I guess I don't see paying pastors as overhead or as payroll. I see that as ministry because that is what they are doing. And then there are funds, yes, and some funds we have that have more money in them than they need. And I think I'm trying to remember whether we have limited funding for, like, let's say I want this to happen at CMC, and so I'm going to give money for it. I'm not sure yet whether we have, I think this would probably be more finance committee, Mark. I'll let you take that back to finance. Whether we have any kind of a policy that says it has to fit in with the overall ministry of CMC. I think we do, but I don't quite remember. But that is part of it. We have a lot of funds, and we talk about that a lot. And we actually just talked about that with Finance Committee when they met with us about the need to clean up some of those funds. And, for example, we still have quite a bit of money left over from that campaign that we did a number of years ago. COVID interrupted us. And so we still have over $200,000 of that campaign money sitting. So so far, I haven't heard people complaining, I gave my campaign money. Why hasn't it been spent on what I asked for it to be spent? But it just, Arlen, did you have? No. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you had your hand up. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, John.
We're coming to the end of the year, and our mailboxes at home are bombarded literally with good things to give to.
Right.
And many of them are things within our own denomination, and they come directly to us. And then I think that there's a tendency that maybe we see all of that. Oh, by the way, add another thing, that even on television, why these good things of feeding children and so on are coming to us all the time. It used to be, I think that, and now I'm quite old about this, but it used to be that we would just automatically give our giving to the church. And so then we had that in mind. The church didn't need to come to us to ask for money because we were just giving it all to the church. And then the church would say, well, we're giving half of that or a third of that to missions. And now that's sort of changed because missions come directly to us.
Correct.
And so, I like the idea that when I was younger, that all of our giving came through the church, and the church had a budget that that sent those things out. But that's almost impossible today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I guess I can be nostalgic about that, but maybe there's no other answer. But maybe the church ought to be more vocal to us of what you need, what the church needs. Because if we don't know, because we're accustomed to have people asking for it, that we then don't give to the church.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in the last number of years, we have been doing a letter to CMCers, usually at the end of the calendar year and at the end of the fiscal year. And part of that is what you're saying, John, is that you have all these letters and all these invitations to give. And if College Mennonite isn't on that stack, because I know some people literally collect their stack and then they go through and decide who they're going to give to. Does that mean we're going to get overlooked? And yet then, then sometimes we wonder, but is that really, do we want to do that? And is that helpful to people? Because it takes quite a bit of time for someone. Usually it's the board chair that writes that letter. And the whole thing about lots of charities, this has been a number of years ago. I was reading this report about how many how charities have grown. I can't even remember the numbers, but they were astronomical, the number of charities that have sprung up. And the interesting thing was, and depressing, most of the charities, particularly for needs-based things, really are related to animals, pets. And many of us have pets and we enjoy them, but so that's the other thing, is that a lot of charities for animals and things like that then take away money for other causes. And it's the world we live in. And we are College Mennonite, we are competing for dollars in a way that we didn't at one time. Vic and then John.
I think the last number that I read about total charitable giving was in excess of 2 billion with the nation as a whole. But one of the things that I think we ought to at least have a bit of attention given to is overhead. And some of the ones that have the fancy print and television things are spending an awful lot of the money that they take in to pay that. Even a good organization, I hesitate to mention it, but I guess I will, Heifer Project is a fine organization. They do things with animals around the world, but their overhead is considerably more than MCC, which also goes out to 55 countries, but does so more efficiently. So I think efficiency of giving is something that a careful donor would want to pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah, Heifer Project, I know the last time I had looked, their CEO was making over $1 million. And so that was the last I gave to Heifer Project. Yeah.
One thing I've kept in boxes that I'm sorting through is a Bible studies from a philanthropic conference I attended in the early 90s. And it dealt with really what the scripture says about boundlessness, about bounty. And it was an eye-opener that we come at it glass half full, glass half empty, and we have resources. And just this morning, my question is, how is the birthday money spent, or where does it go? And I have a follow-up.
It goes into the building fund. So it goes for building expenses.
So if I can motivate myself to support the building fund, $1 for every year.
Right. Mhm.
At my birthday, that I would give $83.
Correct. Yeah. Well, well, and just also, speaking of the building, just a reminder that College Mennonite is also in a unique situation in that our building is actually owned by Amity, and we are half owners of Amity with Goshen College as the other half. So we have only half the building expenses. But it also, which is a good thing, but it also adds a layer of complexity because we have another partner to work with. So with everything, there's a good and a bad.
One of the things that I heard here makes me suggest that a lot of these charitable organizations, which are not denominational, one can go to their websites and get financial information. I've seen several that have mentioned overhead. MCC, I think, is less than 10%. I've seen others that are in that category as well. And I think that might be a key to our decisions on how much we budget to the church, the local congregation, and how much to outside charities.
I want to also, John, go back to a little bit of something that you said about we used to give money to the church and then the church did mission and sent money beyond to organizations. And just to acknowledge that's really has shifted very much. And part of that is also the way mission is done. People that are in other countries generally all have their own ministry support teams like Sophie and David do that I'm involved with. And so, yeah, it is very different. And congregations are much more centers of mission than the way we used to do it at one time.
At one time, I was director of Church World Service in Haiti and have lived in Haiti for quite a few years. And so I knew all the mission programs and all the charitable organizations there because I distributed food to them through the U.S. government. One of the things I learned during that time was quite surprised at how much money came to these various not Mennonite missions throughout the country, how much came from Mennonites. When most of the directors would find out I was a Mennonite, they would say, "Oh, I get Mennonite support. Why can't you support my mission for more fully?" And when I sometimes, to prove their point, they would open their wallets and show me pictures of conservative Mennonites from all over the country. So perhaps maybe our church would be more, our leadership would be a little more forthright and perhaps encouraging people to support the church more fully and more openly.
I really appreciate all the feedback you're giving, which I will take back to the committee. Yes, very helpful.
Your question was, how are our children learning about giving? Talasha does such a good job of children's story. Maybe Talasha could give a children's story on giving. And a lot of us adults are learning a lot from Talasha's children's stories.
It's good. Yes. One other thing I wanted to talk about just a little bit. We're also planning, Stewardship is also planning on appointing a committee, hopefully, to do a review of our student aid ministry. We have had student aid for a number of years, and some of you will remember this maybe better than me, but I think it was about 20 years ago is when we added Bethany to the program. Before then, it had just been student aid for going to a Mennonite college or seminary. And then Bethany was added when it was just a high school. And since that time, as we all know, Bethany now is grades kindergarten through grade 12. And then Indiana also has the school choice program, which means that Bethany is a part of that. And Bethany students get vouchers. In the last legislative session in Indiana, if you have been, I've been following the school choice partly because I'm not a fan, being very honest. They moved up the dollar amount for school choice to any family of 4 with a household income of $400,000 or less is eligible for a voucher. So there's a lot of, I mean, I spent some time actually going and talking to Will Lichty at Bethany, who is very helpful to help me understand how they work with the finances, how the vouchers work. And I mean, the one thing in short is that the vouchers cover about half the cost of Bethany. And Bethany really operates very much like I remember, I'm assuming Goshen College and all colleges still do, where you have a finance office that puts together an aid package for each student. And that's very much what Bethany is also doing with their students, because Will had told me, this was about a year ago that I talked to him. At that point, he said the new kindergarten that was going to start, tuition was like, I don't know, 13 something for a kindergarten, 13,000 something, I think at that point. Now that, don't hold me to that. That's what I remember, but doesn't mean that's what it was, but it was in that range. So one of the questions that Stewardship has gotten more than once is, do we still need student aid for Bethany if they get vouchers? And obviously, if the voucher only covers half, plus the voucher, the amount varies, Will told me, depending on what school system that you come from. So Fairfield's vouchers are worth less than Goshen's vouchers. Goshen's vouchers are less than Elkhart School's vouchers. So that also varies somewhat. And the fact that when Bethany was added, we did have a congregational vote on that. And but we haven't really, as a congregation, and this is not, it's been no one, I would say it's no one's fault. It's just one of those things that time goes on and we haven't ever taken the time to say, we should really look at this ministry again. And it seems like right now, especially with vouchers, and it seems like there's kind of sometimes a conflict between private school and public school as a result of this. I think both are needed. So we're hoping to put together a group that will spend some time going through the congregation and listening. And so maybe I'm hoping that Sunday school classes will have this group, this committee meet with them to get feedback, because I think that's what we need to figure out going forward. I also know that from talking to Will at Lichty that it's very difficult. So if our student aid committee, for example, says we're going to give, I don't know, I'm just making up a number, $5,000 to each student, college, seminary, Bethany, everybody gets $5,000. And then we don't raise that much money. And let's say we only can give $4,500 for each student. Well, then that means Will has to go back and do a new aid package for every one of our kids because we didn't meet our commitment. So it has ripple effects. And the committee, of course, is only projecting and guessing to the best of their knowledge of what money they think that will come in. So that's coming. And if any of you are interested in being on the committee, I would love to hear from you because we're hoping for a group of maybe 4 or 5 people that both represent public school, private school, parents, people that have been involved in that currently or in the past. So I'm going to stop right here. So there's some another question. If let me just tell you again. So if you have questions or concerns or comments, Jeff Landis, Del King, Scott Litweiler, Rebecca Slough, Kent Miller, and myself. We're Stewardship, and we are happy to hear from you, your comments and your suggestions, and I really appreciate a lot of the feedback you've given me because it's really, really helpful. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you all for participating. And based on historic memory, I don't mean this sarcastically, but this will not be a controversial group to be a part of. My memory is 20 years ago. It's one of those places where we truly are a divided community, and finding ways to go through that politically charged issue will be a challenge for all of us on whichever side of the issue we're on. So an opportunity again to offer grace to each other when we disagree. That one is a sharp one. Thank you all. We appreciate you being here. And I'm sure Alan still has some more tickets, free tickets to give away if you have room. And remember, it's 7 o'clock, not 7:30.